doing?
When examining Nintendo's long and storied history, there is no question that burns quite as brightly as, why doesn't Nintendo just make a new, regular Star Fox game? And if there is one, it's, why did Nintendo sell the studio that hard carried them for an entire generation? Of course, we already have answers for these questions. Nintendo doesn't make regular Star Fox games because of creative ego, their refusal to swallow their pride and do something straightforward instead of cooking up some kind of innovation. Meanwhile, the commercial success of the games up to this point has been spotty, an issue that wasn't helped by the fact that a lot of them kept deviating too far from their core. As for selling Rare, Nintendo made that choice because the studio wasn't able to get enough system sellers out on the GameCube quickly enough. And while it's debatable if it was a short-sighted move to sell off the studio that carried the Nintendo 64 only a year after the GameCube's release, without really giving them that much of a chance to create potential system sellers on a console that only needed that kind of support more and more as the generation went on, it's at least somewhat easy to imagine that some guys in suits just really needed that line to go up as quickly as possible. But while the answers may be satisfying on a purely intellectual level, it still doesn't make the consequences any less sad, which is why people still ask these questions. It's not coming from a logical place, it's coming from an emotional place. In this context, Star Fox Adventures represents an omen of death. It was the final game Rare developed under the umbrella of Nintendo, and it also kicked off the trend of Star Fox games jerking themselves around and deviating too far from their core. Rare, like Star Fox, is a shell of what it once was, and both of their eventual downfalls are often traced back to Star Fox Adventures in one way or another. In terms of gaming history, that is its legacy, and much like Rare's own Banjo Nuts and Bolts' legacy of destroying Banjo-Kazooie, it's a legacy that frequently overshadows the game itself. On top of this, its existence is a painful reminder of the ill-fated Dinosaur planet upon which the game was built. A game that maybe could have been incredible if it were not burdened by the Star Fox license. In this sense, it's easy to look at Star Fox Adventures and see it as nothing more or less than the game that ruined everything for everybody.
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch!
I don't expect Nintendo to buy Rare back anytime soon, even if Microsoft does have an offer for them, and even if they did, I can't imagine it would change things as much as we'd like to imagine. And I certainly don't imagine Rare trying to bring Dinosaur Planet back from the dead, but Nintendo does still have Star Fox sitting around on a dusty shelf somewhere. And even though I'm not quite as enthused about this new generation of Nintendo at this point as I'd like to be, the Switch 2 has barely been out for half a year, and now that we have a whole decade between Star Fox 0 out of 10 and now, maybe it's not so far-fetched to imagine a new Star Fox game could be coming in the next few years, so it may turn out not to be such a bad idea to take an adventure back to the game that ruined everything for everybody. Now, you can't really talk about Star Fox Adventures without first discussing where the game came from. The previous Star Fox game was Star Fox 64. You know why they call it 64, right? Yeah, it's a long story. By a not insubstantial margin, Star Fox 64 is the most successful game in the series, unless you count the 5 million and change Super Nintendo mini consoles that had both Star Fox 1 and 2. Which is to say that when most people say Star Fox, they're usually referring to 64. I think the majority of people who've played 64 will tell you that it's phenomenal. I think for me, it's probably one of my favorite games of all time, and that's simply because it's just fun. You turn on the game and bam bam boom, you're just playing the game. It's a 3D rail shooter with immaculate controls and really punchy and satisfying sound effects and visceral feedback.
I guess I should be thankful.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
beautiful.
Yeah, I heard you the first time. It's remarkably replayable with all kinds of different routes you can take, and with the possible exception of Aquis, there are no low points whatsoever. It's not rocket science, it's not deep or complicated. Star Fox 64 is just a fucking blast from beginning to end. Full stop. And when you roll the credits, you're gonna be like, alright, let's do it again. On top of all of this, the voice acting added a lot of character to it.
What a dump.
I hear you, Slippy.
Too bad Dad's not here to see you fail.
I think you look better in a tank.
Why don't you come down here, Falco?
I'll pass, Fox. Fox, you made it.
Bill! Is that you? I can't believe it!
We can catch up later, Fox. Do a barrel roll. 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 Do a barrel roll.
What?
Listening to the characters' unusually humanistic banter is one of the most endearing things about the game from the standpoint of presentation. I mean, the music is also really good, but the game would not be what it is without the dialogue. After seeing how utterly impotent Nintendo has become at writing and storytelling in recent years, with particular respect to Zelda, because they haven't been making Star Fox games, so that's the closest point of reference I have.
Demon King. Secret Stone.
Rhodesia? Zimbabwe?
I sometimes can't really believe that Nintendo actually wrote this game. To be clear, the story of Star Fox 64 isn't deep. It's not going to change your life like Mother 3 or anything like that, but just the way characters are written, with the subtext of brief conversations suggesting relationships that go back years, it's something very special and something that I haven't seen much out of Nintendo since. Much like Ubisoft, Nintendo cooked and then they forgot the recipe. I could recommend this game to anybody. If you're watching this, you probably played it already, but if you somehow haven't, pause the video, play it through once, it'll only take like an hour, and then come back. Star Fox 64 came out in 1997, and during this time, Rare was in the kitchen with multiple gourmet dinners. That year alone, they would put out Diddy Kong Racing, GoldenEye, and the criminally underrated Blast Corps. These were great video games, so you could say they were on a roll, but as great as 1997 was, the hot streak was far from over. They had a few projects going on at various stages of development, like Conker's Good Fur Day, Banjo-Kazooie, Jet Force Gemini, and a little game called Dinosaur Planet. Rare did not initially have a very concrete idea of what this game was going to actually be, but eventually settled on an adventure game inspired somewhat by Ocarina of Time. Initially, the plan was to have Timber as the main character. You may remember Timber as the guy from Diddy Kong Racing that nobody played as because the game has Banjo in it. Because they wanted the game to actually be good though, they decided on two new characters, Saber and Crystal. The plan was for the two protagonists to be playable, to have their own concurrent adventures. Saber would have an AI companion in Tricky the Triceratops, and Crystal would have Kite the Pterodactyl. The player would swap between their two stories at various intervals using the Swap Stones, who would later become the Warp Stone. Just reading about this stuff is exciting, and I don't think it's a stretch to imagine that the game could have been another defining title of Rare's partnership with Nintendo. And I haven't even mentioned the leaked build of the game that surfaced in 2021. This footage right here is me playing the unreleased Dinosaur Planet on an emulator. It's kinda nuts that this was running on a Nintendo 64. Playing through this build made me feel simultaneously very excited and also quite sad. Because while it was impressive to see just how far along it was, knowing that this version of the game was never going to be complete made me want that exact thing even more. It made me long for something that an incomplete game could never give me.
I just want you to know that not a day's gone by when I haven't thought about it.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's go back to when the game was being developed. During this time, Takaya Imamura and Shigeru Miyamoto were discussing a completely separate project far and away from Rare. Imamura wanted to make a new Star Fox game out of a feeling of attachment to the series, and Miyamoto signed off on it, but on the condition that he make it a third-person action game instead of a rail shooter. They had a name for the game, Star Fox Adventures, but for a while, that was about as far as they got. While a series of experimental demos were developed internally, the project became stagnant as people who otherwise would have helped with it were preoccupied with other stuff. Games that at the time were considered a lot more important, mostly for the upcoming GameCube system. Dinosaur Planet was continuing to pick up steam, enough so that they had a demo available for E3 2000. However, when Miyamoto saw that demo, he got an idea. After noticing how similar Saber looked to Fox McCloud, Miyamoto felt that it would be redundant to have two separate series both featuring an anthropomorphic fox-like character in the lead role, especially when one of those characters had already established years of history. So Nintendo and Rare began discussing a way for these two projects to merge together. When the decision was made to turn it into a Star Fox game, the Dinosaur Planet elements started to get changed to be more in line with Star Fox and even replaced when necessary. This is most notable in the structure of the game. Crystal was originally a major protagonist, and you'd spend half the game playing as her. Having two protagonists was kind of a load-bearing pillar of the game's design and a forward-looking feature for the time period in which it was released. And after all those years of hard work, Rare was now in a position where they had to consider discarding that feature, along with Crystal, entirely. But while the dual protagonist mechanic was completely axed, Miyamoto swooped in and saved Crystal in the end. In an interview with Nintendo Dream, he revealed that Miyamoto had always wanted to add some kind of sex appeal to Star Fox, suggesting that he'd seen the series as being a little bit more on the mature side, certainly compared to Mario and Zelda, and so they made her look like this. Then they made her get captured. This right here is the biggest problem. I mean, not the design, that's fine, but sidelining Crystal did a lot of damage to the game. If you're not compelled by the woke feminist argument of, isn't it a tragedy that we lost out on a female game character at a time where it wasn't as common and she got turned into a distressing damsel, I imagine any serious person can at least see how developing a game for years with two protagonists who play very differently just to sideline one of them and scale back things to work with only the other one is going to result in a product that can never be as interesting. If there's one thing Star Fox Adventures needs, it's something to distinguish it from other games that already did what it was doing and had a much more deft touch at doing so. And in another universe, maybe a dual protagonist setup like Dinosaur Planet originally tried to have could have filled that void. I think even if Dinosaur Planet's original vision didn't result in a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, it would have at least been celebrated for being unique and inventive. When doing research for this video, a term that came up a few times was marriage, the marriage between Star Fox and Dinosaur Planet. You could probably call it a marriage, but rather than a fairy tale wedding, it was kind of like a loveless arranged marriage orchestrated by royal families to advance some political agenda. Dinosaur Planet's vision was compromised by adopting the Star Fox license, and anybody working on a future Star Fox title now had the baggage of fitting Dinosaur Planet stuff into the game. In that way, it has some similarities with the American Super Mario Bros. 2, a game adapted from the existing Doki Doki Panic. Today, we don't even think about how Shy Guys, Sniffits, Bob-Bombs, and Birdo were all from a game that initially had nothing at all to do with Mario. As long as I can remember, they were just Mario characters from the get-go, even though they weren't intended to be in the beginning. But while cute little NES sprites leave a lot of room for improv when imagining what they might represent within their respective world or changing their design to fit with the series later, it's not necessarily as easy to do that with a game like Star Fox. In the following game, Star Fox Assault, they were able to put Crystal in a sexy bodysuit and give her a sexy gun and make her speak perfect sexy English without explaining it at all, and somehow it just kinda worked. But having Fox's little dinosaur buddy Tricky show up felt a little bit out of place in an otherwise serious game where General Pepper asks you to kill him.
You said you weren't gonna treat me like a kid anymore. Then stop acting like one. Shoot me!
You might have picked up on this by now, but I've been bringing up Crystal quite a lot, and that's not because I found her to be the most memorable part of the game, but because it appears that most other people who talk about Star Fox Adventures seem to feel that way. And that's kind of a bad omen considering how limited her actual presence in the game is. Now I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to forget whatever bad info you may have heard in the past because I'm about to drop some facts on you. Adding a hot woman to a game does not automatically make the game good. The Witcher 3 has 10 of them, and that game had me sleeping like I just pulled an all-nighter at Richard Simmons' house.
Are you sleeping, you fat fuck? Come on!
In my experience, and I confess this isn't particularly scientific as much as it is anecdotal, I feel like whenever you look up Star Fox Adventures on Twitter or wherever, the celebration that it gets is often vague, with lukewarm praise of the game's design at best, but mostly you're gonna see fan art of Crystal and people blaming her for turning them into a furry. This is now a review of that fan art, and I give it all a perfect 10, which is what I might have said if I was a furry. Anyways, there is a fan base for Star Fox Adventures that continues to defend it all these years later, and while some amount of that could probably be attributed to the power of nostalgia in synergy with the power of breasts, it is still a game in a major franchise made by what was, at the time, a world-class game developer, so it's disingenuous, at least I think, to just dismiss those opinions out of hand. Of course, some of those opinions are more than a little bit silly, like the minority of people who hold JonTron singularly responsible for the game's reputation. Not everybody played Star Fox Adventures, but a lot of people have seen Mr. Arian Jafari's video on it, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if for some people, this is their only actual exposure to the game. The video is kind of a classic. It's not the most academic analysis of a video game you're ever going to see. It's got a lot of silly jokes in there, but it's not particularly deep, and basically all the game footage is taken from the first 2 hours of the game, and if any of this sounds familiar, all of this applies to his Nuts and Bolts video as well, which I referenced in my own Nuts and Bolts video from October. Like I said in that case though, this video is over a decade old, so I don't hold any of this against Jono. This isn't Neril or Nakey Jakey we're talking about. JonTron is not an essayist, he very clearly just wanted to make a funny video first and foremost. But still one that expresses an authentically held belief about a game. And even in only showing the first chunk of the game, the review is very revealing. It doesn't matter to John as a critic what the rest of the game looks like because as a Star Fox fan, that first chunk of the game is such a straightforwardly wrong thing. And the rest of the game is going to be pretty much the same, so the only thing you can gain from playing it more is resenting it more. For me, though, I have to admit that I kinda like this game, not because it's good, but because it has a lot of competency on display in certain areas, and it can be endearing in the right moments. Compared to Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, where I found myself pleasantly surprised upon finally actually playing it back in October, Star Fox was not so lucky, and I actually did play it when I was 12, so not even the small particles of nostalgia can blind me to its faults. But I do feel obligated to give it some truly well-earned respect. The first thing you'll notice about the game is the visuals. Dude, these graphics are the best graphics ever. They were cooking with these graphics. You can absolutely tell that when Rare was allowed to work with newer hardware, they breathed a collective sigh of relief. Even in the trailers they showed, the game already looked pretty good, but the Nintendo 64 is clearly barely clinging to life at that point. Bringing the project to GameCube, the game not only looks 10 times better, but also runs at 60 FPS somehow. Yes, this is emulator footage with higher resolution, but even on real hardware, the game is very nice to look at. It's so good that it's almost tragic, because it demonstrates that Rare still had the sauce. And they really brought the heat with this game in a way that few other studios would have been doing in 2002. Rare was already famous for producing some of the best graphics the Nintendo 64 had to offer, but even on new, less familiar hardware, they were able to put out something that looked incredible. This might have been one of the best looking games that year. The fur effects are very well done for the time, the gameplay animations are very smooth and detailed, the lighting is phenomenal, you got these great screen effects, the real-time shadows are very forward-looking, and the water is absolutely beautiful. I wish water was real. Then there's the sound design. The game makes liberal use of stock sound effects that don't help the immersion, but the ambient sound is brilliant most of the time. Then there's the soundtrack, which, when it's at its best, is also quite good. It's quite atmospheric in a way that cannot be taken for granted and really sells the world in the right moments. Then you have the cutscenes. Now, the cutscenes are often cringy, but in a charming early 2000s video gamey sort of way.
You've got to go to the Ice Mountain and rescue her son, the Prince Tricky.
Nice name.
Even if you didn't know Rare was a British developer, you can totally tell that most, if not all, of the voice actors are British, because when the character they're voicing doesn't have a British accent, they're very clearly having a hard time keeping it up with all the ers and the ahs.
What about a weapon?
Hey, I wouldn't if I were you.
Is there anything we can do for her?
He is the ruler of the Sharpclaw tribe.
That's a bit weird, but I understand. You said this would save her!
I was captured by the shark claws!
This stuff alone is often more charming than anything else. It's not the kind of thing I would count against the game, and in combination with the other elements of the presentation, it could have come together to create a truly magical adventure for the GameCube, a true killer app that no other platform had an equivalent for. But I'm not sure it did. Star Fox Adventures is frequently compared to Zelda, specifically Ocarina of Time, which would have celebrated its 4th birthday in the year of Star Fox's release. It's a comparison that makes a lot of sense. They're both third-person action games with similar combat and movement mechanics. The heart containers and magic meter are basically yoinked directly out of Zelda. You lift up a rock and fall down a hole to find some magic thingy. There are 4 stone thingies to find, but actually there's an entirely separate set of thingies on top of that. There are 3.9 billion puzzles that involve pushing a block. There's this little menu where you can equip items and moves to a button press, which is actually one of the few things this game does better than Zelda. You can open this little menu while playing and move it all around with a C stick. It's actually really convenient when you get the hang of it, much more so than pausing the game every 3 seconds to equip the fucking iron boots. Beyond that though, the Zelda comparisons that the game invites so frequently unfortunately don't do it very many favors, and that is to be expected. Ocarina of Time is kind of a miraculous video game, all things considered, but you don't always realize just how calculated and polished a game like that actually is until you play a game that tries to do something similar and can't really figure out how. Even if you don't have the vocabulary or the most deft touch at describing the exact size and shape of the disparity, you can still totally tell that there is a disparity. It's something you can feel, even if you can't quite put your finger on it. First off, let's talk about the combat. Like Zelda, there's a targeting system, but unlike Zelda, it's automatic and just locks onto the enemy without asking. The combat is pretty shallow. You wait for an opening and then spam the A button to do the same bap 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 wham bap 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 wham combo. Even when facing multiple enemies at once, they only attack you one at a time and you're just standing there waiting to lay the beat down. I'm not going to act like Ocarina of Time's combat was super deep, but it did throw some curveballs at you eventually, like the Stalfos for instance. They would jump slash you, 2 would attack you at once, you had to manage your space. There was a certain dynamic element to it. This game, you get an opening, then you slam on the A button like a dumbass and then you win. Even with bigger, scarier enemies, the strategy is more or less the same. And it sucks because there are actually cool maneuvers you can do with the staff, but the use cases are so sparse that you probably won't remember the input for it on the once in a blue moon occasion it actually presents itself. I did try to experiment with it, but it almost never worked. Nothing was as effective as the slam the A button strategy, and this remained true for the entire duration of the game. The enemies also don't do much damage, so even when you seemingly have to sacrifice some of your health just to get an opening, it's almost always pretty much a no-brainer. Then there's the exploration. One of the coolest things about Ocarina of Time is Hyrule Field. It's a big open field where you can see the whole world. You can see Death Mountain out in the distance, and you can climb it. Hyrule Castle hiding behind the big stone walls. A lot was done to make the world of Hyrule feel complete and cohesive. Even though it's dated in many ways, it still sells a surprisingly effective illusion. Star Fox by comparison is too segmented to the point where there are frequent intermissions of doing this stupid R-Wing flying mission in between chapters. The in-game explanation is that the planet is breaking into pieces, so the locations are quite literally no longer part of the whole, which unfortunately cheapens the adventure-like quality of the game. As for pieces of the planet flying off, I'm not sure if that specifically is the product of the Star Fox marriage, like they had a mandate to put in R-Wing sections and needed an in-universe explanation for it, or if it was part of the plan from the beginning and it would have been handled differently. We know that at least in terms of story and setting, space was a part of it, as evidenced by Saber referencing his home planet, and the fact that the game had the word planet in the title. But whatever the situation may be, the way it's handled on the gameplay end unfortunately does the game a bit of a disservice. Another explanation is that half of what Fox is doing in this game is stuff that Crystal would have been doing in the original, and the R-Wing is just an easy way to explain why he can go halfway around the world so quickly, when in the original it was two different people in two different places at once. Now, there are highlights to the gameplay. Tricky as a companion character is pretty neat. You keep him fed on a steady diet of mushrooms so he can do stuff for you like dig up treasures and set things on fire. This is cool, but it's also fairly incidental a lot of the time. Unlike Zelda, where every dungeon will introduce a new idea and a new doohickey to traverse the area and solve puzzles, Star Fox does that like 3 times maybe. For the most part, the game stretches a small handful of mechanics and tools way out until the end of the game. In Ocarina of Time, a tool you found in a dungeon will end up being useful all over the place, like maybe you saw a heart piece in a weird place and thought, how do I get that? And then 2 hours later you get the hookshot or whatever it is, and then it all falls into place. It was a very rewarding dynamic. In Star Fox Adventures, there's like 3 parts where that applies. Off the top of my head, I can remember exploring and finding like a small handful of upgrades for my magic meter, most of which I didn't really need because the game isn't that hard, and magic tends to be a very renewable resource. Usually when you get stuck in the game, it's not because the puzzle is insanely difficult, it's usually just kinda stupid. The one time I had to look up the solution for a puzzle was here, where for the first time in the entire game, you have to use this scope thing that Slippy made to look at a thing in the distance through another thing. I bought this thing at the beginning of the game using the unbalanced dinosaur planet economy that is way too forgiving, and completely forgot about it because it wasn't important at all. Except it just so happens by some fucking coincidence that it was actually an extremely important quest item that I really needed 17 hours into the game. There are some mini-games, I guess you could call them, to try and keep things fresh, but they're not always exactly good. I remember the mini-games in Rare's own Banjo games being good, Donkey Kong maybe not so much. After replaying Banjo for the video on the new recompiled PC port, which you should definitely check out by the way, I still think they're fun. Many of the puzzles and minigames in Star Fox Adventures feel more like, here's some shit, I guess. I might just be imagining it, but I feel like there's an almost spiteful element to the game that flares up more frequently the further you go. Most evident in this chapter, which turns into just standing there like a bitch spamming fireballs at incoming enemies to defend the slow-moving Stegosaurus you're riding on, then a few minutes later do the exact same thing, except on a pterodactyl this time. Then he brings you to the boss, and here's some more mindless shooting. Puzzle solving is an imperative cog in the Zelda machine, and even if you're one of those guys who thinks Ocarina of Time is baby food when it comes to puzzles, the ones in Star Fox Adventures will give you a whole new appreciation for it. To be honest with you, I can't even remember most of the puzzles in the game, even with it being fresh in my memory. The first Krazoa Shrine test you have to do is finding a ball under a cup. No, really. TikTok users do this with dog treats, to their dogs. This game is rated T. There's a minigame where you have to light these beacons in a time limit, and another where you have to just mash the A button to push some guy into a hole which gets recycled for a later Krazoa Shrine. Look, there's even a scoreboard for the best times, like they really expected people to do this more than once. I guess there are these races on these hoverboard things that are kind of fun. More fun than the R-Wing sections anyway. Otherwise, it's nothing special. Now let's talk about the dialogue. Even though some of the cutscenes are charming and cute, a lot of the NPC dialogue in the gameplay is very utilitarian. It's a lot of, you should talk to more Earthwalkers, and give me blank, and I will help you on your quest.
I'm too hungry to talk to strangers.
Fuck off.
Making characters feel like humans with lives in a lived-in world is an important part of selling an adventure game, and at least in terms of dialogue and writing, I don't think it was adequately prioritized here. A lot of the NPCs are just there to insert information into your brain. In its worst moments, it's almost like Zelda 2 for the NES if it had voice acting. It's also frustratingly uncharacteristic of both Star Fox and Rare for that matter. Even in Banjo, where most of the characters are there to give you a jiggy, there's still some amount of flavor and humor to the dialogue, not to mention Conker's Bad Fur Day, where the characters being funny is the whole gimmick.
Oh, really?
I think for me, the most memorable character in this game is this guy.
Me get out of this place. Adios.
Star Fox Adventures often feels compromised and stripped down in this respect, and as you get further and further into the game, the harder it becomes to escape that feeling. I don't know exactly what the working life was like around this game. Like, I can't speak for any of the Rare staff, but I have to imagine that when you spend years working on a game like Dinosaur Planet, and then Nintendo comes crashing in and basically says, change this whole shit, sorry if this ruins your big plans, it would generate a certain amount of resentment. It's not difficult to imagine some of the Rare staff feeling very defeated that a lot of the ideas that took them years to put together and might have possibly been celebrated for their innovative qualities suddenly had to get sidelined to make room for the Fox. Again, the big thing that was supposed to set this game apart was the dual protagonist angle. Removing something that unique for the sake of turning it into a Star Fox game changes the game at a spiritual level. It almost gives the impression that it was no longer a passion project made by visionaries and sensitive artistes, but instead a project of corporate necessity, a big-name Star Fox game for Nintendo's new box. I wouldn't be shocked at all if some of the Rare staff just lost any emotional attachment they once had to the project and just kinda threw up their hands and started settling for good enough, as though making the game just turned into another job. Sometimes I wonder if this was a Paper Mario situation where Rare didn't really want to turn it into a Star Fox game, but they knew their place and didn't want to risk rocking the boat by telling Miyamoto that maybe this wasn't so great an idea. This is most notable in the story, in particular the end sequence, but there are symptoms of it all throughout. Not all games need a good story, but for the kind of game this is, it really should have been better. In my opinion, the story is not altogether very interesting, even though there are elements that could have been, like the lore around the Krazoa. The ancient temple with all its shiny graphics and wonderful music really makes this feel like a truly sacred and special place in a narrative context that just doesn't do it any justice. It also becomes more clear that so much of the writing was an ongoing patch job of rewriting the story around the dramatically overhauled gameplay context and thematic disruption, and unfortunately, not everything was patched that should have been. Real quick, here's the plot of Star Fox Adventures. Oh, and for those of you who haven't seen my Phantom Pain video, when I say real quick, here's the plot, you're probably going to be listening to this for 12 minutes. We open on a wall of text explaining that Crystal is investigating the death of her parents, which leads her to respond to a distress call from Dinosaur Planet. She boards this flying ship where she meets General Scales for the first time. He and Crystal have a brief exchange in this weird made-up language that happens to not have any words for General, Scales, Dinosaur, or Planet.
General Scales. Hiku, Kohud, or Taskuki, Eve Dinosaur Planet.
I find this to be a silly detail, especially considering everyone just spoke English in Dinosaur Planet.
Ruler, tyrant, and dictator of the Sharpclaw tribe. And who might you be, animal girl?
His motivation seems to be that he is a ruler and he has to control the tribes with fear, otherwise he can't be a ruler anymore. Imagine Ganondorf, but the most shallow and one-note incarnation of Ganondorf you could think of. So, slightly better than Tears of the Kingdom. He throws her overboard, but she's saved by her flying buddy, who brings her to Krazoa Palace, where she meets a wounded Triceratops who explains that the planet will die without the Krazoa spirits, which can be obtained by trials that only the pure of heart can clear. Yeah. After releasing the first spirit, she is trapped inside a crystal by somebody? Put a pin in it. The game then cuts to the Star Fox crew minus Falco. They're basically just vibing, surrounded by pizza boxes and drink cans, deja vu, when General Pepper calls on Fox to tackle a new mission, that is to save Dinosaur Planet, which is in the process of exploding. Massive space chunks flying off the planet can cause huge problems for the rest of the galaxy, so General Pepper offers them big money to sweeten the deal since they haven't had a real job in years because Andros is definitely deader than fuck because he exploded in a big ball of fire. Do not put a pin in that. He is dead. He is not a factor. Upon landing on the planet, the Queen Earthwalker assigns Fox the task of rescuing her son, Prince Tricky, so after bringing a gift to the Warp Stone, which you knew to do because his only dialogue was this,
Nobody ever brings me gifts anymore!
He helps you warp to the Ice Mountain to rescue Prince Tricky, which you do after defeating these dino goons in a race. Mid-conversation, Slippy fixes the translator device such that Fox can understand what Tricky is saying.
Sizboo at hot spring, or you'd be frozen by now.
Why, you little...
Hey, I wouldn't if I were you. My dad's a King Earthwalker, and he'll bash you up.
I don't think he'll be doing any bashing. He's been captured. That's why I've been sent to rescue you.
He's been captured?
Now, if you've been paying really close attention, this should strike you as off. At no point yet in the story has Fox been informed that King Earthwalker was captured. Unless it was part of Queen Earthwalker's dino talk earlier and Slippy just chose not to translate that part. Crystal knows of King Earthwalker only because he was peripherally mentioned by the wounded Earthwalker in Krazoa Palace, but Fox wasn't there. The apologetic reaction is that Fox just extrapolated that information based loosely on the context that the planet is in danger, or maybe it was part of the distress signal that General Pepper received, but otherwise, this feels like something's missing. And I can only imagine that it made more sense at some point, and as a consequence of ripping the game to pieces and rebuilding it with duct tape to try and make it make more sense as a Star Fox game, things like this got left in and make the game make less sense on its own terms. There's a similar moment in the back half of the game when you free Kite, Crystal's pterodactyl friend, who would have been her sidekick in Dinosaur Planet, who says,
Hey, aren't you a friend of Crystal?
Which, yeah, if by friend you mean Fox stared at her while she was unconscious. And she showed up as a floating head speaking a language he shouldn't have been able to understand because Slippy's translator wasn't fixed yet. At this point, Fox doesn't even know Crystal's name, I'm pretty sure.
How do you know Crystal?
Wait, what? How does he know her name? How does he know who Kite is talking about? No, really, I am 90% sure this is the first time Fox has ever heard her name. He didn't hear it here, or here, or here. Unless it was mentioned in the mission briefing at some point, I guess we're just supposed to extrapolate that more information was given to him through telepathy that we didn't see. I mean, it's either that or I just missed the part where he learned her name originally, or it's another consequence of the patch job. Now, maybe I wouldn't have zeroed in on this part very much if I didn't already know about the development of the game. Like, in another universe, maybe I would have just said, well, maybe Fox just instantly put the pieces together that the crystal that Kite was referring to must be the girl from earlier, and maybe the subtext of that would have been easier to read with better cutscene direction. But unfortunately, now that I've actually gotten to play Dinosaur Planet, it's hard to just set aside that forbidden knowledge. If my research is correct, in Dinosaur Planet, Crystal was Saber's adopted sister, so they would have already known each other, which obviously they couldn't do with Fox because he already had his own lore that was developed before Dinosaur Planet was even conceived. The decision to replace Saber was made relatively late in development, considering Crystal is still a major protagonist in the leaked build, despite the fact that the build also features Fox McCloud instead of Saber, meaning it's from after the 2000 demonstration, but before the decision to move it to GameCube. I think this perfectly exemplifies just how disruptive it was to introduce Star Fox into the mix. They had a story, they had characters, and then suddenly they had to rip it open and reverse engineer it to make it make sense as a Star Fox game. If this moment has an apologetic reaction, it's that when Kite said friend, he meant it insofar as piecing together that Fox and Crystal are on the same side based on his actions, and also because he saw him holding her staff, but he was there when she lost it in the first place, so you know what, I don't actually care that much. Anyways, we bring Tricky back to the Queen, give her some medicinal shrooms, and she explains that we need to find the spell stones to keep the planet together. So you go to the snowy place and talk to Garunda Tay, the gatekeeper of Dark Ice Mines. In Dinosaur Planet, the gatekeepers defend the spell stones, so you need their permission and their help in order to get them yourself. General Scales enslaved Garunda Tay's tribe, so he opens the gate to Dark Ice Mines, which you have to fly through with your R-Wing. You go to the mines, you save his tribe, get the first stone, return it to the Force Point Temple, then out of nowhere, Crystal, who at this point is a complete stranger who Fox has never met, except as a floating head, assuming that detail is even supposed to be taken literally, begins speaking to you telepathically, and a Krazoa spirit shows up to explain to Fox everything about Krazoa spirits and the trapped girl. Just, like, out of nowhere. Like, hey Fox, here's this other thing that's completely separate from your adventure so far. Okay, bye. Its placement and delivery feels really awkward in context, and I suspect it's another artifact of the Star Fox overhaul. Also, after checking again, at no point in this cutscene was Crystal's name mentioned to Fox. Fox reluctantly does the second Krazoa task, obtaining the second spirit, and brings it to the shrine where he sees Crystal, whose name he doesn't know, for the first time, and because she's the only Fox woman in the entire galaxy and she's not wearing any clothes, Fox immediately falls in love with her, and suddenly finding the Krazoa spirits becomes important. Summarizing the plot past this point quickly becomes very redundant. You free a Cloud Runner whose tribe is being attacked by General Scales. That Cloud Runner is the gatekeeper, so you can now go to where their tribe lives. You beat up Scales' goons, save the tribe, get a Spellstone, place the Spellstone, do a Krazoa spirit thing, release spirit, go to Earthwalker place, free tribe, get stone, place stone, do Krazoa spirit thing, go here, free tribe, get stone, and one kinda cute moment where Fox makes Tricky an honorary member of Star Fox.
Prince Tricky, Earthwalker, you are now an honorary member of the Star Fox team.
Dad, did you hear that? Me, a member of Star Fox!
Then you reach the end sequence. Besides Tricky, there aren't really any powerful character moments or emotional highs or lows. It's just a bunch of stuff that happens, none of which will prepare you for the ending. The ending is one of the most baffling things I have ever seen. After releasing the second last Krazoa spirit, you're finally ready to face down the woefully underdeveloped General Scales, who has had like 5 minutes of screen time total up to this point. He does a big speech and you're like, alright, let's fucking go.
Scales, you are no longer any use to me.
The battle is immediately interrupted by a big scary voice in the sky who came out of nowhere and everybody is hearing for the first time. He smites the general down with great vengeance and furious anger, and Fox obtains the last Krazoa spirit. Fox goes to save Crystal and they gaze lovingly into each other's eyes and it's kinda cute, but then this giant Krazoa head levitates into the sky.
I am reborn, the mighty Krazoa god.
Crystal takes the staff back and starts shooting at this thing to look cool and useful for 3 seconds before Fox jumps into the R-Wing after the giant spooky face. It turns around. It was fucking Andross the whole time. Every single solitary thing that happens in this game, yeah, Andross, he did that. To tell you the truth, it really was a shocking twist because there was basically zero foreshadowing or build-up at all. Now, I thought maybe replaying the game after all this time, I might have noticed some weird things that would tip me off to this big twist. When you engage with a piece of fiction that has some kind of twist to it, it's never as dramatic on subsequent readings, but there's a different kind of reward, where you start to notice weird things that subconsciously prime you for what's coming. Oh shit, Liquid's shooting at me. I better call Miller about this. Oh, that's strange. Unless you count Fox saying, I recognize that voice from somewhere 3 seconds before the twist is revealed, Adventures doesn't really do anything to prod the player in that way. I guess there was also the part where Queen Earthwalker says, somehow General Scales got even stronger than before, but like, calling that foreshadowing is really generous. Maybe we were supposed to keep that brief moment in the beginning where Crystal says, it's you, before getting captured, in our heads for the entire game, but there's nothing here really to suggest that this is Andross we're talking about. This could have been anybody or anything for all we know. It's clearly someone Crystal is supposed to recognize, but how are we supposed to know that Crystal would know who Andross is? And until the end, the game doesn't really do anything to suggest that it might be Andross or that it's even a possibility that it could be Andross. And then to add insult to injury, Falco's bird ass shows up halfway through the fight. He wasn't in the rest of the game, I assume because they couldn't figure out a logical use for him. Anyways, you blow up Andross for real this time, probably. Then you go back to Great Fox where they do a little lore dump.
It seems that Andross discovered the ancient power of the Krazoa, and by trapping Crystal, who had the ability to channel this power, he was able to use this energy to revive himself.
No. He exploded. He didn't just die, he fucking exploded in a big ball of fire. Bullshit, he revived himself, that homie is dead. Maybe that was Venom Andross, who knows. Come to think of it, I may have an apologetic interpretation for this point too. In this continuity, the easy ending of Star Fox 64 where you defeat the fake robot Andross is the canon one, and not the one where you kill his true form, but judging from the fact that the game refers to him reviving himself, which he wouldn't have had to do if he was literally never damaged as in 64's easy ending, I imagine this was just a cop-out. They needed Andross to be in the game, so whatever. He revived himself. Sure. You know, this boss fight really is the perfect visual metaphor for Star Fox Adventures. Andross, antagonist of Star Fox, parasitizing this Krazoa artifact, an ancient species developed by Rare for Dinosaur Planet. Anyways, Falco joins back up with the team, then Crystal boards the ship to also join the team and tell Fox, thank you, and then the credits roll. So the story, like the gameplay, has a few missed opportunities. Crystal is the most obvious one. I feel like there could have been a more wise use of her character than trapping her in a crystal, as poetic as it is. If you have to sideline her to make room for the main character of Star Fox, then fine, but what if in between chapters she got to do something interesting, like for instance Peach does in Paper Mario? Like, I don't expect her to be baking cakes or reading General Scales' diary or some shit, but I feel like she could have had more utility here. They already made her playable in the intro, so I don't know how logistically difficult it would have been from there. It also would have been really cool to see Fox and Crystal get some kind of development. The game literally opens by telling us that her parents were killed, which is more or less how Star Fox 64 opens, telling us Andross killed Fox's own father and possibly his mother, depending on whether or not that comic was canon. If I played this game knowing nothing about it beforehand, I would have thought, okay, cool, here's something for these two characters to bond over. The materials were there, but instead, Crystal is largely peripheral for most of the game. Another frustrating example of missed opportunities is in something called the Test of Fear. This is one of the Krazoa spirit tests, and in this one, Fox hallucinates a bunch of scary dinosaurs trying to kill him before being devoured by a giant General Scales. In Dinosaur Planet, Crystal was the one doing this test, which makes a lot more sense because she has reason to be legitimately terrified of General Scales, who already tried to kill her without hesitation. But Fox was ready to throw hands with this guy earlier on when he just ran off. There was a perfect opportunity here to tie it back into Star Fox while also foreshadowing the big twist at the end. Like, imagine if Andross showed up in this sequence, like Fox had a PTSD flashback to 64 or something, or even just a transparent Andross face tries to eat Fox instead of General Scales. And this is what's frustrating about the game. The more you play it, especially with the additional context of Dinosaur Planet, the more you start to see the phantoms of a game that could've and maybe should've been, but never was. And for what? So that Nintendo wouldn't have two characters that looked kinda similar to each other? Oh, the wicked, wicked horror. I really do think it's a great thing that this game gave Fox a love interest, but with Nintendo seemingly writing Crystal out in Zero, we don't know if we'll ever see her again. Earlier I said that I kinda like Star Fox Adventures, so hearing me go off on it this hard for so long is probably more than a little disorienting. For clarity, there are things that I like about it, but my exact words were that I kinda like it, and the kinda is the key word here. I remember liking this game more before I got to play the Dino Planet leak, but I definitely started to notice the not so good parts a lot more frequently after the fact. Initially, I was writing this video as kind of a companion piece to last year's video on Banjo Nuts and Bolts, structured as another tepid defense of one of Rare's more divisive titles, but after replaying Star Fox Adventures, I just found it to be a more difficult game to defend in many respects. Banjo Nuts and Bolts is hardly perfect either, but I think it was more accomplished in what it was trying to do. even if what it was trying to do was frustratingly fundamentally dissimilar to its predecessors. And I can only imagine that Dinosaur Planet, developed uninhibited by Nintendo's overreach, would have also been more accomplished than Star Fox Adventures. At least then, it wouldn't be burdened by any obligation to fit in thematically with an established series. It could have had its own identity. Star Fox Adventures, by comparison, is a beautiful and frustrating experience. It's a semi-solid game. I like the graphics, I like the presentation, I love the music, and I'm glad the two-time savior of the Lilat system has a hot wife, but it's difficult not to be underwhelmed by Star Fox Adventures upon revisiting it. This may not literally be the game that ruined everything for everyone, and it's definitely not a horrible, irredeemable game either, but I can't help but feel that there was a much better game struggling to exist underneath it all. I don't like to apologize for my opinions, but I do feel a little bad about this one, because there are a lot of people to whom this game means a lot. But for me, knowing what I know now, the best I can do is to kinda like it. Otherwise, I think Star Fox Adventures is a testament to the consequences of creative overreach and disruptive mandates. And to make matters worse, it isn't even clear if Nintendo learned from those consequences or not, considering they forced world-class game developer Platinum Games to derail Star Fox Zero with the Wii U's gamepad 14 years later, and they haven't revisited the series since. In any case, all we can hope for now is that Nintendo learned their lesson for good this time, and we can get a new Star Fox game, preferably one that picks up after Assault, or one of Command's less dramatic endings. I'm not gonna hold my breath, but I would welcome Nintendo to surprise me, in a good way this time.